Good morning, students. Welcome back after the summer vacations. I hope you're all fine and you had nice summer vacations, although you might have spent the vacations at home this time. So, hoping that you enjoyed and you also kept in touch, some touch with your books at least. So, once again, welcome back. And if you remember that in literature, today it is going to be a literature class. So in literature, we had completed 4 units till now. And today we are going to take up the 5th unit. That is The Adventures of an Understudy, written by Sir Anthony Hope Hawkins. Now, Sir Anthony Hope Hawkins, he is better known as Anthony Hope. He was an English novelist and a playwright, and he was a very prolific writer, especially of adventure novels. But he is remembered predominantly for only 2 books, the most famous books which he had written. One is The Prisoner of Zenda, and its sequel, Rupert of Hentzau. Now, the chapter which we are going to take up today, The Adventures of Understudy, it is an excerpt. It is one of the chapters which is taken from the book, the novel, The Prisoner of Zenda. Now, this is a very wonderful, interesting story, or we can say a sort of mysterious story. There is a character. Okay, first let me tell you the meaning of the word understudy, The Adventures of Understudy. Understudy means an actor who takes up on a particular role in a play if the usual actor is absent. Okay, that means we can say a duplicate, somebody who resembles somebody else and plays his part when the other person is absent. Now, in this chapter, in this novel, this role, it is played by Rassendel. Now, Rassendel, he is a person who's traveling from England to Ruritania to see the coronation of King Rudolph. Now, the meaning of the word coronation means official or legal ceremony in which the king is announced or pronounced as a king. Official ceremony that is called a coronation. So a chance meeting in the woods brings Rassendel and Rudolph face to face, and they discover that they look exactly alike. So by chance, in the woods, in the jungle, they both come face to face, and when they see each other, they are, really surprised because they are exactly alike. Even their hair is the same shade of brilliant red, the color of Rudolph's royal Elfberg family. Now, the Rassendel, he has brilliant red color hair, which is exactly like the same, the color of the hair of Rudolph's Elfberg family. The whole family, the royal family, Elfberg family, they all have red hair. So the next day, Rudolph is found unconscious and is unable to attend his coronation. So when it's the coronation ceremony that particular day, he is found unconscious. You know what is the meaning of the word unconscious? He's almost fainted. He is not in his senses, and so he is not able to attend his coronation ceremony. But the show must go on, or else the king's half-brother and enemy, Black Michael, the Duke of Strelsau, will take over the throne. Now, it is very important for King Rudolph to attend his coronation ceremony. Otherwise, what will happen? His half-brother and his enemy, he's his brother, but he's also his enemy, whose name is Black Michael. and he is the Duke of Strelsau. There is one place, a sort of a city or a small kingdom which is called as Duke of Strelsau. So he's the Duke over there, and he will take over the throne. So he'll pronounce himself as the throne, the king. So for the sake of Ruritania, Resendel must pretend to be Rudolph. Now because Resendel resembles Rudolph, so for the sake of this country, Rudolph's friends as well as ministers, they request Resendel to pretend to be the king, to come in place of the King Rudolph and attend the ceremony. So that means he has to act like an understudy. So he must pretend to be Rudolph for the day and take part in the coronation. The king's friends, Colonel Sapt and Fritz. So these are the two people who are the friends of the king. One is Colonel Sapt and one is Fritz. Von Terelem promised to help. But will Resendel manage to deceive? So both these friends, they promise that they will help Resendel to play the part of the king, to tell him everything about the king. But will he be able to play the role of the king, and will he be able to manage to deceive everyone, and so that nobody recognizes him? So will he be able to manage to deceive Black Michael and Princess Flavia, the woman who Rudolph is engaged to marry? Now read on to find out. So let us start with, this was a sort of introduction to the chapter. So we are going to start with the first page of the chapter now. I hope you have your book open on page 49. Chapter 5, The Adventures of an Understudy. Now, the game had begun. The cool morning air streaming in through the window of the train cleared my head, and I was able to take in all Sapt said to me. So the game had started. Which game he is talking about? The author is talking about the game of the understudy, the role which Resendel had to play. He had to pretend as a king. So they were traveling in a train. They were going to that place. The cool morning air streaming in through the window of the train cleared my head. So he was woken up. Everything was clear in his head, and he was able to take in all Sapt said to me. So he was able to understand everything Sapt told him. So Sapt was telling him about the history of the king, about his manners, behavior, and the family and everything. He was wonderful. So Resendel finds Sapt very wonderful because he was able to tell him very nicely. He began at once to instruct me in the history of my past life, of my family, of my tastes, pursuits, weaknesses, friends, companions, and servants. So the author says, now he's already started imagining himself to be the king. So he says, Sapt, he instructing him about his own life, the history of his past life, about his family, the pursuits, the weaknesses, friends, companions, and servants. He told me the etiquettes of the retiring courts, and he also told him how he had to behave in the court, and promised to be constantly at my elbow. And Sapt also promised Resendel that he would be constantly at his elbow. That means constantly by his side. So you can write down, constantly at my elbow means near to him, very close to him, constantly by his side, to point out everybody whom I ought to know, so that he could tell him side by side about everyone who comes to meet him, whom he should know. At 9:30, looking out of the window, I saw the towers of a great city. So at 9:30, they were able to see the city. Your capital, my liege, grinned old Sapt. So old Sapt, he grinned, he sort of smiled as he mentioned to Resendel that his capital city, and he calls him my liege. Now my liege is a phrase which is used in respect for a person of high honor, so respectful manner of addressing the Lord that he served. So he smiled when he called him my liege, and with a wave of his hand, leaning forward, he laid his finger on my pulse. And then he leaned a bit forward, he bent a bit forward, and he laid his finger on his pulse. So he felt his pulse. A little too quick, said he, in his grumbling tone. So he started worrying. He's in a grumbling tone. He's in a like he was pointing him out, complaining tone. He said, "Your pulse is running too quick, a little too quick. Why are you troubled? Why are you nervous?" "I am not made of stone," I exclaimed. So Rassendyll tells him that I'm a human being. I'm not made of stone. So it's obvious before when I'm playing this part, so I will get nervous. "You'll do," said he with a nod. So he agreed, Sapt, he agreed. Then he paused and looking at us said quietly, "God send we may be alive tonight." So he said a sort of prayer. He prayed to God that we may be alive tonight. That means he was praying to God that nobody should be able to recognize Rassendyll and nobody should be able to find out exactly the truth about him. So he says, "And Amen," said Fritz. And Fritz responds by saying, "Amen." So let us move on to the second page now. The train stopped. Fritz and Sapt leaped out and held the door for me. So both of their friends, they stepped out and they held the door for the king in respect. I choked down a lump that rose in my heart. So it was obviously he was feeling a bit nervous. So he choked down, he took it down, a lump that rose in his throat. So it is a sign of nervousness. Then I settled my helmet firmly on my head. So he put his helmet, the sort of a crown on his head, and breathed a short prayer to God. And he also prayed. The last thing I did was to feel if my revolver was handy and my sword loose in the scabbard. So in order to make that he was secure, so he felt his revolver was handy and his sword, it was very loose in the scabbard, so that whenever the need arises, he could take out and save himself. Then I stepped onto the platform of the station at Strelsau. So they got down at the station at this place. They had reached the capital, Strelsau. Now the bells throughout the city broke out into a joyful peal. So as soon as the future king stepped out into the city, the bells started ringing, people started celebrating. So the sound of a military band and of men cheering struck my ear. So there was a military band, they started playing, men started cheering. So he was receiving a very, very warm reception. King Rudolph V was in his good city of Strelsau, and they shouted outside, "God save the king." So he had reached his city, and the people, they were shouting, "God save the king." Old Sapt's mouth wrinkled into a smile. Now old Sapt, he was smiling when he heard this slogan, "God save the king." Now why was he smiling? Because in his heart of heart, he knew that the game they were playing, and actually they needed this prayer, "God save the king." So he says with a smile, "God save them both." Because now both means the King Rudolph, who's not fine right now, and Rassendyll. So he smiled and he just said very, very softly, "God save them both," he whispered. "Courage, lad," and I felt his hand press my arm. And side by side, he, like a good friend, he is encouraging Rassendyll, and he pressed his arm and he said, "Courage, lad." Lad word is used for man. A group of officers stood awaiting me. So some officers, they were waiting for the king. At their head was a tall old man covered with medals and in a military uniform. So, leading that group of officers, in front of them there was a tall old man, and he was in a military uniform, and he was covered with medals, and Marshal Strachans whispered Sapt. Now Sapt told Rassendyll who was he told him that it was Marshal Strachans, and I knew that I was in the presence of the most famous veteran of the Ruritanian army. So he knew that he was the veteran. Veteran means an old and experienced person who had served in this army for a long time. So when he came to know that it was Marsh cattle there, he understood that he was going to meet the veteran of the Ruritanian army. The marshal saluted me in a few loyal words. So the marshal, in honor of the king, he saluted him, and he spoke good words for the king. I accepted his greetings very suavely, and received the compliments of a large number of distinguished guests. So he received the compliments which were given to him by all the guests, and he received all these very suavely, with a lot of confidence and elegance, but not sincere. Because why he says not sincere? Because he knew he was not the actual king. No one revealed the least suspicion. So the author says that till this time, nobody showed any sign of suspicion or doubt. That means they all accepted him as the king, and they were not doubting that he is not the king, exact king. So I felt my nerve returning. So when he felt that he was doing his part well, and till now nobody was able to figure out his truth, so he started feeling the confidence back in his nerves again. So this is the phrase here: I felt my nerve returning, and the troubled beating of my heart subsiding. And the heartbeat, which was beating fast till now, it also started subsiding. It started becoming slower. Presently, I mounted my horse and started to ride through the streets with Marshall on my right and Sapt on my left. So he mounted a horse, and they were going through the streets of the city. On one side, Marshall; on the other side, Sapt. The scene was brilliant as we rode slowly to where the royal palace stood. So on the way, the scene, it was very, very beautiful. Brilliant, because the whole street, the houses, the people there, they were all greeting the king. They had decorated the streets, their houses. Every house was hung with red and decorated with flags. The streets were lined and with raised seats on each side. I passed along, bowing this way and that. So as he passed through the streets, he was bowing down this way and that way, just as a mark of respect he was showing to the people, under a shower of cheers, blessings, and waving handkerchiefs. The balconies were full of brightly dressed ladies who clapped their hands and curtsied. So even the women, they were brightly dressed, and they were clapping their hands and cheering, and they were showing courtesy. They were also bowing down in front of the king. A torrent of red roses fell on me, so somebody threw flowers on him. One bloom lodged in my horse's mane, and one flower, it settled. Lodged means settled in the mane of the horse, and the face, the hair of the horse, and I took it and stuck it in my coat. So very confidently, by this time he had grown very confident. So he had become normal actually now. So his presence of mind had come back, and he was acting very confidently. So he took that rose which had lodged in the mane of the horse, and he put it in his coat. The marshal smiled grimly, and when the marshal saw him doing this, he smiled. The red rose for the Elfberg's marshal, and he also pointed this red rose is for the Elfbergs. I said said I gaily, and he nodded. So he said cheerfully, and he nodded. I have written gaily, and a strange word it must seem. So the author says, I've written the word gaily, but here it sounds very, very strange. Why this word sounds strange here? Because in his heart of heart, he was actually not very happy. He was feeling a little nervous. So, but the truth is that I was giddy with excitement. So, although he was excited, but he was feeling giddy. He was feeling shaky with a lot of excitement and energy. At that moment, I almost believed that I was in very truth the king. So, his excitement had risen to such a height that he almost started believing, that he was the true king, because right now he was into the situation. The situation had taken all his attention, the reception which he was receiving, the happiness, the whole atmosphere. It had taken everything away from his mind, and he was just enjoying that particular moment, and he was feeling happy. Well, we went by, and then the marshal turning round in his saddle, waved his hand. So as they were going, all of a sudden, marshal, he turned round in his saddle. He started looking back, and he waved his hand. He did some gestures. The soldiers closed round us, and all the soldiers who were walking here and there along, so they closed in on the king. They surrounded the king closely so that the crowd could not come near me. We were leaving my quarter of the city and entering Duke Michael's. Now, why was this happening? Because they were leaving now his quarter, Rodolph's quarter of the city, the part of the city, and now they were entering the part of Duke Michael's, Rodolph's half brother. And here, Black Michael of Strelsau was a hope, a hero, and a darling. And in this part of the city, the Black Michael, or Rodolph's brother, he was the hope, he was the hero, and he was a darling. He was a king there, and people loved him. So there was a sort of fear that maybe the people of this part of the city might not like Rodolph, so they may try to harm. So in order to protect, as a precaution, the marshal, he told the soldiers to surround the king. This action of marshal showed me more clearly than words what the state of feeling in this town must be. So, in the Rassendyll, now he understood that what kind of feeling people of this part of the town had for the king. So, Marshall did not explain anything like this, anything of this sort in words, but his actions clearly made Rassendyll understand how the people hated the king in this part of the city. But if fate made me a king, the least I could do was to play the part handsomely. So he says, if fate, if destiny, if chance had made him the king, so then he's going to play his part handsomely. He's not going to feel nervous, so he's not going to let the show down. So he started encouraging himself. Why this change in order, Marshal, said I. So he started asking Marshal why this change in order, why they were not continuing to walk. It is more prudent, sire, he murmured. So Marshal explained that it is going to be it is very prudent to take this step. Prudent word means to take some sensible and careful decisions. Try to avoid unnecessary risks here. So he says, it is more prudent, sire, he murmured. I stopped the horse. Let those in front ride on, said I. So Rudolph, actually, who is Rassendyll, he stopped his horse and he gave his direction. He says, let those in front ride on. The soldiers who are in front, let them go ahead until they are 50 yards ahead, till they are 50 yards away from him. But you, Colonel Sapt, and my friends, wait here till I have ridden 50 yards. And he says, let those soldiers walk away 50 yards, then I will walk or I'll ride, and you people wait here till I am 50 yards, I have ridden 50 yards, and then you will start walking, so that people could have a look at me and see that no one is nearer to me. And he also tells him that, see that no one comes near to me. I will have my people see that their king trusts them. And he tells the reason why I'm doing this. He says, I want to show to the people that I trust them. I am not afraid of them. I don't fear them. I have faith in them that they are not going to harm me. So this is the step taken by Resendel, who's acting like Rudolph. Although his friends Sapt and Marshall, they're not happy, they hesitate, but he does not listen to them. Sapt laid his hand on my arm. So Sapt tried to interfere. I shook him off. So he did not listen to him. He shook him off. The Marshal also hesitated. Am I not understood? And this is the answer he gives. He says, am I not clear what I've told you? So they were supposed to obey him. Said I, and the marshal gave the order. So marshal had to obey. I saw old Sapt smiling into his beard. And then when he looked at old Sapt, he was smiling into his beard. His smile was not very clearly visible, but in his beard he could see him smiling. But he shook his head at me, and he bowed down his head in front of the king. If I had been killed in open day in the streets of Strelsau, Sap's position would have been a difficult one. So he understands that if by chance the king, Rassendyll or the Rudolph, he gets killed here, then Sap's position will be difficult. He will be in difficulty that he could not take care of the king. So I, riding alone, entered this barely decorated part of the town. So now the king Rudolph entered this part of the town which was barely decorated. It was least decorated. This was because in this part of the town Michael was the duke. It was more interesting, for I heard the comments of the crowd, and the people were not cheering. There were not loud noises, also no clapping. So now he felt better because he found it more interesting, because he could hear the comments of the crowd. Now, which let us see the crowd, what comments they made. If he is red, he is right, cried an old woman. So the first comment which he heard was, if he is red, he is right. That means if his hair is red, he is right. He can be a king. I laughed and took off my helmet. And he laughed at this comment, and he took off his helmet to show so that she might see that I was of the right color, and the crowd cheered at me. And when the crowd saw the king doing like this, showing the hair, the crowd started cheering. He looks paler than usual, said one. So another comment which he got was that he looks pale, he looks yellowish, weaker than the usual, the other times. He's bigger man than I thought. And another comment which he gets was that he's bigger than I had thought. So he had a good jaw under the beard after all, commented a third. So people were making all sorts of comments when they saw the king. So let us move to the next page now. The pictures of him aren't handsome enough, declared a pretty girl. So this was the remark which he got from a pretty girl. She found him more handsome than she had seen him in the pictures. So these are the few remarks which the people of that part of the city where he was disliked, they gave. But in spite of these signs of approval and interest, the mass of the people received me in silence with sullen looks. Now, with sullen looks means with a sort of anger and silence, because they were not happy with him. They supported Michael. So, Some people showed interest in him and gave these remarks, but most of the people received him with sullen looks, and they received him in silence. That means they showed no interest in him. At last, we were at the church, and for the first time, the sudden sense of my audacity almost overcame me. So, at last, they reached the place where he had to be coronated. And when he came actually to that place, it was this moment when the sense of audacity almost overcame him. Now, what does this phrase mean? It means he suddenly realized that he had taken a very huge risk, and fear overtook him, all the other feelings in his mind. So he realized the reality of the situation now, because here there were so many people who would be just watching him. So he had the fear that he maybe somebody recognizes him. Everything was in a mist. So it looked blurry, it looked unclear. So he did not know actually what is going to happen now and how is he going to do now. So everything was in a mist as I dismounted. Dismounted means he came down from the horse. I saw the marshal and sapped dimly, and dimly the group of gorgeously robed priests who awaited me, and my eyes were still dim as I walked up the aisle. So he looked at everyone, sapped and marshal, and then priests who were gorgeously robed. He saw them dimly without paying much attention, because in his heart of hearts he was very nervous. So I saw marshal and dap dimly, and dimly the group of gorgeously robed priests. Gorgeously, we all know, it means beautifully. They were dressed beautifully. The priests, the people who had come to perform the religious ceremony, and they were robed. Robed means dressed. And everyone was waiting him, and when he looked at everything unclearly. So he did not see anything clearly now. As he walked up the aisle, aisle means the rows, in between the rows to the place where he had to be coronated, to the stage sort of, the chair. I saw nothing of the crowd that filled the church, so he did not see anything in the crowd. There were a lot of people who were there, but he did not see any one of them because he was busy in his mind. Only two faces stood out side by side clearly before my eyes. The face of a girl, pale and lovely, and the face of a man whose red cheeks, black hair, and dark, deep eyes told me that at last I was in presence of my brother Black Michael. So he did not see anyone in the crowd, but only two faces he could see, those which stood out. One was the face of the girl, which looked pale and lovely, and the other was the face of Black Michael, his half brother. And when he saw me, his red cheeks went pale all in a moment. And maybe Black Michael, he was not expecting him here. So when he saw him, all of a sudden, his red cheeks, they went pale in a second, and his helmet fell with a clatter. And his helmet, the crown, the helmet which he was wearing, it fell down. It made a sound, clattering sound. So it can be possible that Black Michael was the one who had planned, who had done something to Rodolphe to make him unconscious and all that. So when he saw Rodolphe here, who was actually Rassendel, so he got shocked, and his cheeks grew pale and his helmet fell down. He was not expecting Rodolphe here. So let us move to the page 53 now. So his helmet fell with a clatter on the floor. Till that moment, he had not realized that the king had indeed come to Strelsau. So, till he had seen Rudolph, or Rassendale, we can say, he had not realized that the king had actually come to Strelsau. So it shows that maybe he was the one who was involved in this making of Rudolph unconscious. So, of what followed next, I remember nothing. I knelt before the priest as he anointed my head. Then I rose to my feet, took from him the crown of Ruritania, and set it on my head. I swore the old oath of the king. So, the author says, or we can say Rassendale says, that after that, whatever followed, he remembers nothing. He just remembers he knelt means he kneeled down on his knees and the priest anointed him. Anointed means he put oil as part of the ceremony on his head. And then he rose to his feet, he got up and he took the crown from the priest and he put it on his head and he swore the oath of the king. He spoke the oath of the king. Oath is pledge, no? The promises which one makes. Then the lady with the pale face stepped from her place and came to where I stood. So after this thing was over, the lady with the pale face, she came out of the place where she was standing and came up to him. And an attendant cried, "Her Royal Highness, the Princess Flavia." So the attendant announced her name as she walked forward. Flavia put her hand in mine and courtesied low. So when Flavia came up, she put her hand in the hands of Rudolph, the so-called Rudolph, and courtesied low. She bent low in respect. And then came the Duke of Strelsau. So then came Duke of Strelsau. Who was he? Michael, yes. His step trembled, I swear. So his feet, they were trembling. He was not able to walk properly. Maybe because the things had not gone according to what he had planned. So his step trembled, I swear, and he looked to the right and to the left as a man looks who thinks on flight. So he was looking here. He was feeling very, very nervous in this situation. He was feeling very out of place in this situation because things had not turned up as yet planned. So he was looking here and there. He was not looking straight. And he was looking as a man who thinks on a flight. Who thinks on a flight means a person who looks like he wants to run away from that situation. So he was feeling so uncomfortable in this situation. So while walking up, he was looking right and left. His face was patched with red and white. His hand shook, and I felt his lips dry and parched as he kissed my hand. So this was a courtesy. This was the behavior which everyone did when they came up to congratulate the king, the newly appointed king. So when he came up, his face was looking patched with red and white. No, it was looking discolored. So he took his hand, the king's hand, and kissed the hands. And the Rudolph or Rassendale could feel the lips were very dry and parched. Parched means very rough. Resolutely doing my duty, I took my dear Michael by both my hands and kissed him on the cheek. So the king also did his duty. He took his hands and he kissed him on his cheeks. Resolutely means in a very determined way. I think we were both glad when that was over, and both of them were not comfortable in this while doing all this, and both of them were happy when this moment was over. But neither in the face of the princess nor anyone else did I see the least doubt or questioning. So, Rassendel or Rodolphe, he examines, he evaluates the whole situation now. He says neither in the neither in the face of the princess nor anyone else did he see any sort of doubt or questioning that they were able to recognize him. So no, he was successful till now. So nobody had any doubt that the king was not exactly their king. But neither she nor anyone else dreamed or imagined that I could be other than the king. So nobody even could imagine or dream that this person who was standing in front of them could be somebody else other than the king. So for an hour I stood there as though I had been a king all my life. So for 1 hour he was standing there, people were coming and greeting him, and he was behaving as if he had been a king all through his life. So nobody was able to suspect him, and he was growing confident moment by moment. Everybody kissed my hand and the ambassadors paid me their respects. Then we went back through the streets to the palace. Then they went back, started moving back through the streets. I was in a carriage now, and this time he was not walking. He was not riding a horse, but he was sitting in a carriage, side by side with the Princess Flavia. Princess Flavia was also along with him in the carriage, and they both started talking. She turned to me. "Do you know, Rodolphe," she said, "you look somehow different today." And now came the bolt from the blue. So this was the first time Rassendel, who was pretending to be Rodolphe, had got any negative remark. So Princess Flavia, she pointed out that, "Rodolphe, you are looking someone different today." The fact was not surprising, but the remark was disquieting. Now, Rassendel, or the author, says that this fact that he was looking different today, the fact was not surprising because it was obvious he was somebody else. But the remark which he got, it was very disquieting. It caused Rassendel to fear. It caused worry for Rassendel. So he got a little nervous back again. I said that what was perfectly true. So when he got this remark from Princess Flavia, he said something which was true, perfectly true. "My dear princess, it must be because nothing in my life has affected me more than the reception I've been greeted with today." So he gave a very diplomatic answer, He told what was true, and this remark satisfied Flavia. It killed two birds with one stone only, with one remark, we can say. So, "My dear princess," he says, "that it must be I'm looking different because I've got so much of love today. I've got so much of affection, honor today, the reception which I got from my people today, that I'm looking very different. I've never got such things beforehand, so that is why it is making me look different today." She smiled brightly, so she was very satisfied, very happy with the answer, and this answer was appropriate. It could be obvious, someday which some days when we get something which is very different, or we're very happy because of it, so we look different, of course. But in an instant grew grave and whispered, "Did you notice Michael?" So she smiled, but in an instant, in a moment, she grew grave. Grave means again she grew serious, and whispered that, "Did you notice Michael?" So she pointed out to him that, "Did you notice Michael?" "Yes," I, adding he wasn't quite enjoying himself. So Rassendel or Rodolphe, he answered that yes, that Michael was not enjoying himself. "Do be careful," she went on. You don't keep enough watch on him, you know." So Flavia, as a true princess, she suggests that you please be careful of him. And she points out that you don't keep a watch on him, which is required, you know. And then Rolf says, "I know," said I, "that he wants what I've got." He says that I know why he was not happy, because I have got what he wanted. Bang, bang, blare, blare. We were at the palace. So at last they reached the palace, and there the drums and were beating and the band was playing. Guns were firing and trumpets blowing. So as he approached the palace, guns were fired in his reception, in his welcome, and they were blowing. Rows of attendants stood waiting. I handed the princess up the broad marble staircase. So they started walking up the marble staircase. Then I took formal possession as a crowned king of the royal palace. So after this ceremony, he took the formal possession as a king. So as a crowned king of the palace, and wondered what the king of Ruritania was doing. And while he took the position of the palace, he, as a formal king, he was wondering what the actual Rodolphe, real Rodolphe, must be doing at that moment. So this finishes the chapter, and hope you liked and you understood the story. And it was just one of the chapters of the story from the novel The Prisoner of Zenda. So after this, what happens? A little description is given here. I'll read, because that will help you to get what happens, or maybe it will help you to encourage you to read the whole novel. It's a nice novel. The excitement heats up as Black Michael kidnaps the real king. So this excitement which is there, it heats up, it is increased when Black Michael kidnaps the real king. And Resendel is forced to keep up the pretense for longer. And Resendel, he had come there just for the ceremony, but now he is forced to keep up this pretense, the pretending of the king, for longer than he expected to. The story of how he rescues Rodolphe. So later on, he has to stay in the palace, and then in the rest of the story, we come to know how he rescues Rodolphe. He becomes part of the system. He comes to know the reality and all that, and then he later helps to rescue, to save Rodolphe and save the throne of Ruritania from Michael. Forms the story of the prisoner of Zenda. So what happens, how he rescues, where is Rodolphe, and all that. So that is what forms the story of the prisoner of Zenda. So you'll like the story if you read the whole novel. Even after listening to this one chapter, we are interested to know what actually happens in the story. So do read this chapter once again, and if you get a chance, you can read the whole novel, because these days you're getting time, you have enough time, so don't waste your time in place, you utilize your time in reading, enhance your reading skills. That will help you to overall enhance yourself, the personality, and your skills also as a student. So I suggest, if you are interested to know what happens in the story next, you can get the novel or you can download it from the net and read. Thank you.